When Marvel was making Spider-Man No Way Home, they went through many different versions of the script, character designs, and storylines just to figure out what this movie would look like. At one point, they had a different cast of villains that would go up against Spider-Man in the final battle. They also weren't sure if Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire would make an appearance in the film. No Way Home was Marvel's first live-action Spider-Verse film that they were going to release. It was also the end to Tom Holland's first Spider-Man trilogy. The stakes were high, and they wanted to get this film right. So, they shuffled through a lot of different ideas and ended up scrapping a lot of them. The talented artists at Marvel had some unique looks to these characters that sadly didn't make it into the final version. And thanks to the concept art, it shows us those other directions the movie almost took with scenes that never got filmed and deleted characters that were supposed to show up. The production for Spider-Man No Way Home started back in 2019, even before Spider-Man Far From Home had come out. Originally, they didn't plan to include any of the other Spider-Man, and the movie's main villain was going to be Kraven the Hunter. Following the events of Mysterio revealing Peter Parker as Spider-Man to the whole world, with Kraven hunting him down. But due to Sony and Marvel having a brief fallout with the rights of Spider-Man, they had to renegotiate their deal and the direction for Spider-Man 3. Sony ended up pushing Marvel to incorporate more of their Sony characters into the MCU Spider-Man franchise. We all know what happened the year after 2019, but this delay caused major changes to the film story and also a different reveal on how all three Spider-Man would meet each other. American Chavez, a character who we saw in the Multiverse of Madness, was expected to make an appearance in No Way Home and play an important role. This scene would have been how we were introduced to Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield Spider-Man. In this concept art, we can see Peter, MJ, Ned, and even Flash Thompson with American Chavez using her multiversal powers to bring them to the MCU. But due to delays in the film industry, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness ended up releasing after No Way Home, which led to Marvel cutting her role from the film entirely as she had to be introduced and established to properly fit into the story. Instead of Zoe Lomez, who played American Chavez in Doctor Strange, they ended up using Isabella Mercedes for the role, who is now playing Hawkgirl for the DC Universe. John Watts, the director of No Way Home, shared how Reddit even influenced the reveal of how Tom Holland and Spider-Man would meet the other Spider-Man. Then I was on Reddit, and I was looking at people who had already made fan art. It was a rooftop scene. It was sad. 2 Doctor Strange portals were open and 2 Spider-Man are stepping out. I was like, well, we can't do that. If that's exactly what everyone thinks we're going to do, we absolutely can't do that. It's clear that they felt insulted in some way that the grand reveal of all the Spider-Man was too predictable, which is why they chose to have Ned Leeds open the portal using the sling ring. A much more unexpected reveal that fans wouldn't have theorized online before the film came out. But in the film, this is how Peter ended up meeting Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield after Aunt May's death. They just decide to change the reveal to the audience. There was even an arguably terrible idea that was pitched to John Watts where he refused to reveal the name of the person who told them this idea, but instead of having Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield appear as characters in the film, they wanted to have the 2 show up as a brief cameo to help Spider-Man in the final battle, with one of the Spider-Man shooting a web to help Tom's Spider-Man when he was in danger. I was like, I won't make that happen. I absolutely refuse that. Just a character showing up for a cameo being like, hello, remember me? Okay, see you later. I was like, that's not going to happen. In an early version of the film, we were supposed to see the return of Mysterio after he faked his death in Spider-Man Far From Home. At one point in the film, there was going to be a scene where Peter finds Mysterio, who is very much alive, and would end up getting into a fight with him at a high school football game. He was going to beat up a defenseless Mysterio without his costume in front of a large crowd of people and ruin this game. Something that Mysterio actually wanted to happen to him, because he ends up getting Jonah Jameson to be at the game and record what unfolds. The intention of this was to discredit and ruin Spider-Man's image even more than it already was. And as we saw at the start of No Way Home, a portion of the public hated Spider-Man, where he had to deal with the Mysterio believers and suffer from the PR damage. We don't know a lot about this scene as it was only developed in early stages of the film. Mysterio was even supposed to show up in the final act of the film at the Statue of Liberty. We can see in this concept art that he's going against Doctor Strange while flying in his suit. It's unclear if he was going to be using the illusion drone tech that he used in Far From Home, or if he'd actually have powers this time. Another previous Spider-Man villain that was meant to make a return was Michael Keaton's Vulture. Originally, during the portion of the film where Peter brings back all the multiversal villains to Happy's apartment, there was even concept art that shows that Peter had a different destination in mind. In this photo, we can see Peter with Green Goblin, Doc Ock, and a very frustrated Jamie Foxx all webbed up on Vulture's lawn as he is seeking help with the problem of the new multiversal villains. This would have been a fun revisit to Homecoming, as Vulture already knew who Spider-Man's identity was before the public did, and it was someone Peter could trust. There was also another illustration developed which showed Peter taking them to Vulture's garage in the hopes of fixing them before sending them back. We can see both Sandman and Doc Ock, but there are two other villains who are tied up, and we can assume they're Electro and Green Goblin. Peter also would have been teaming up with Vulture to round up the rest of the villains instead of doing it on his own. Michael Keaton would have also been given a new look as Vulture, giving us a more salvage and scrapped-together suit where he's been down on his luck and working in a junkyard. We didn't end up getting to see Vulture at all on No Way Home, as he ended up getting transported to the Morbius universe because Sony had other plans for his character, and likely wanting to set up a Sinister Six movie. There was also a different version of the battle between Doc and Spider-Man on the bridge that showed us Green Goblin joining the fight. In No Way Home, we only saw Osborn briefly appear and swoop in to attack them, only for Peter and Doc Ock to be saved by Doctor Strange. The art for this scene shows us Osborn not just fighting Spider-Man, but also fighting against Doc Ock. And these two rivalries got really chaotic on the bridge, as they would end up tearing it apart completely. We saw a much more destructive battle from what we saw in the movie, with people running away in fear to escape the collapsing bridge. And it would have shown us how truly powerful these characters were. There was also going to be a segment in the fight where the train ends up getting derailed, showing us that nobody was safe at all. And this would lead to even more negative PR damage to Spider-Man. We also got concept art of Spider-Man's first encounter with Electro at the power grid fight in the forest. This does closely resemble the scene in the film. There are only a couple of changes they made for the final version. One of them is the color of Electro's lightning, as he ends up keeping his original blue lightning that we saw in his universe. We can also see that when Sandman is shielding Peter from the electroblast, that his sand is actually turning into glass because it's heating up, which was an element in the film we never saw happen. Jamie Foxx's Electro also got a much-needed upgrade in No Way Home compared to the electric eel abomination that he was in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. This is because the artists at Marvel were tasked with reimagining Electro and making a cooler version of him. One of the first character designs of Electro was pretty identical to his previous appearance. The only noticeable difference is that he's yellow in this one, as they changed his electricity when he entered this new universe. They made some variations of the yellow-tinted Electro, but as seen in a majority of the other designs, this wasn't a preferred choice, as they aimed to make him more human rather than electric eel mutation. One of the things that actually excited Jamie Foxx to sign on was that he was going to look different. Playing to me is going to be hot, you know, and I didn't have to be blue and things like that. As far as my character is concerned, said you're gonna be a little more hip and whatever like that, and I get the other character designs aimed more towards a comic book accurate approach, symbolized with the electric star on his face. One of the suits was more armored up with a metallic material, and other variations of him wearing a high-tech suit. They settled on giving Electro a more amateur, put-together suit with a Kevlar vest that had electric conductors attached to him. They also workshopped the lizard's appearance, and they had a much different design from what we got on screen. Compared to his current look, he had a much more frightening and menacing design where his body was built like a lizard rather than having human traits. Instead of a rounded head, they gave him a snout while also changing his eyes and scales to match features of a lizard. The artist drew inspiration from the comics with these designs and decided to put some clothes on his body, giving him the lab coat and purple pants that he would typically wear. It wasn't a requirement that they needed a comic book accurate suit, but certainly was an upgrade compared to his earlier form. There was also an idea that gave him a different depiction where he had a robotic suit that had him looking like a tamed weaven. All of these vials and gadgets on him were supposed to be a built-in control mechanism where he had no control over himself. Similar to Doc Ock's tentacles taking control of his body, they didn't end up incorporating any of these ideas or features to improve his character look because they had concerns about all these changes creating a new character. They believe that heavily altering the look and changing a character's bone structure would be too drastic of a change. This would make audiences feel like it's not the same character that they knew from a previous film, which was the point of bringing all these characters together in the multiverse. Or due to the lizard having the least amount of screen time in the film compared to other villains. He likely wasn't a priority of a character that they had to get right like Doc Ock, where the artist went through many different iterations of designs trying to figure out how to properly give him a new look in No Way Home. It seems like there were some decisions on whether they should take his exact look from Spider-Man 2, or if they should give him a complete new makeover similar to Jamie Foxx's Electro. Some of the early designs showed him having a much more comic book accurate suit. one that we've never properly seen in any of the Spider-Man movies, but only in the cartoons or comics. They even had an aged-up version of Doc Ock with longer hair and a beard. His face resembles Alfred Molina, but it's difficult to see that with him being completely unrecognizable. He also had these buckles wrapped around him, which was different from his other designs. This version would have shaken things up and made it harder for casual fans to recognize that this was the same Doc Ock that they watched 20 years ago. They also made a much more pleasant blend between Doc Ock's Spider-Man 2 costume and his comic book counterpart. The jumpsuit he was wearing had the comic book color theme, and it also incorporated the goggles that we saw him previously wear. In the film, Marvel settled on giving Doc Ock a slightly updated version of his suit from Spider-Man 2 because having massive redesigns with all these characters could cause confusion on why they look different. Green Goblin was a character that was crucial to the plot of No Way Home, and they had to nail his look. They wanted to reimagine what Norman Osborn would look like in this new universe, and they took some different routes. Some of the illustrations had him wearing the original Green Goblin armor from the first Spider-Man movie, which we did end up getting for the bridge scene where he was briefly teased. He would later have a blend of his old suit and the purple hoodie he was wearing at the homeless shelter. This scruffy hoodie was another addition to his new look that incorporated his comic book color scheme for Green Goblin and provided an alternative attempt at giving him the tunic that he would wear in the comics. An early idea in the film was to have all the villains raid a damage control facility after betraying Peter Parker at his condo. Even Electro would get an upgrade of his own from this raid. The suit that he's wearing in this photo would have been assembled using stolen Iron Man arc reactor technology. There's a fascinating version of the Green Goblin where he's actually riding Vulture's wings instead of his own glider. For some reason, they didn't want Norman to keep his glider from the first film, and they thought it would be more MCU suitable if he was able to use the Vulture's glider from damage control. During that raid, he also would have stolen the Dark Elf's armor, which we last saw in Thor of the Dark World, and Norman would apply this to his own Green Goblin costume. This was a scrapped idea that was pitched to Marvel, which got turned down, but it was a clever way to make him more goblin-like without having to mutate or change Norman's DNA. There were some alternative looks where they tried to give Green Goblin a much more tactical military-esque suit, where he would end up having to repair his broken suit, which we can see in these small chunks of metal missing from it. If you look at his arm, you'll see he has this blade attached to him, which is apart from his damaged glider. They didn't end up using this exact design in the photo, but incorporated the glider blade into Green Goblin's final design where he uses it against Peter at the Statue of Liberty battle. One scrapped idea with Green Goblin involved something that may have been controversial and gotten a lot of hate from Marvel fans. There were two versions of concept art showing Green Goblin flying with parts of an Iron Man suit that he stole from the damage control facility, and another one painted to suit his comic book color scheme. Instead of him flying on his glider, there was an idea to have him flying on one of the Edith Stark drones from Far From Home. A big gripe that some Marvel fans had with the MCU's version of Spider-Man was that he was Iron Boy Jr. and wasn't really a Spider-Man, where people wanted a more grounded, friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Where Sony ended up going in a different direction at the end of the film, setting him up to be his own solo character isolated from the Avengers and Stark Industries. Marvel adding more Stark tech to the final battle could have conflicted with this path that they wanted to take. It also would have changed the final battle, getting rid of the need of Green Goblin's pumpkin bombs when you can just shoot Iron Man blasts at them instead, and tainting the image of Green Goblin and instead making him an Iron Green Goblin. Other illustrations showed the new Captain America Statue of Liberty, signifying that this is where the final battle would always take place, and how they planned on ending it with a duel between Green Goblin and Tom Holland's Spider-Man. The scene of MJ getting saved by Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man almost didn't happen because in one piece of concept art, the idea was to have MJ fall from the building and Doctor Strange's cloak of levitation would end up saving her instead. But they decided to pivot to the idea of Andrew Garfield saving her. That way, it would add more to the story and give Andrew Garfield a moment of redemption for not being able to save his MJ. There was some artwork that was developed that showed Ned Leeds riding a Green Goblin glider during the final battle, which was a nod to Ned being the Hobgoblin in the comics. There are some fan theories floating around that Ned might become the Hobgoblin, a character similar to Green Goblin, who has had different characters play him. And in the comics, he has been played by Harry Osborn, Flash Thompson, and Ned Leeds. In the artwork, you can see the resemblance to the Hobgoblin costume with the colors that Ned's wearing. Marvel actually didn't have any plans for Ned to turn into a villain in No Way Home. The artist Phil Saunders confirms that this was more of a reference to Ned being the Hobgoblin rather than pitching a plot twist near the end of the movie. And it was more of a fun idea for Ned to get on Green Goblin's glider and start throwing pumpkin bombs at the other villains. A big reason this theory started to blossom was that when trailers were coming out, there were a lot of villains being teased, and people were noticing they were getting awfully close to the number 6. Well, it turns out in an early version of the script, Venom was going to have a different role in No Way Home, and that Tom Hall and Spider-Man would potentially run into the symbiote. A lot of people thought that the symbiote was going to be introduced and play a role in the storyline. This artwork was made by Thomas Ducrust, who did concept art for No Way Home and has done some for other Marvel films in his career. He released this photo, but didn't confirm why it was created or if it was attached to No Way Home. The writers for No Way Home even shared that there was an early version of the script where Venom would have more screen time in the movie and that he'd actually show up at the Statue of Liberty battle to fight along the other villains. The art of Mysterio at the Statue of Liberty kind of represents that because it shows there's many different iterations of who is going to be in that final battle. They concluded by saying it was a fun idea that the 6th member of the Sinister Six got stuck at a bar and would end up leaving a little bit of a symbiote behind. Instead of Doctor Strange and Peter having their fight in the mirror dimension, they were originally going to be traveling across the multiverse and traveling to Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield's universes to specific and recognizable moments from those trilogies and just casually fighting in the midst of everything going on. For example, they had concept art of them fighting at the Clock Tower from The Amazing Spider-Man 2. It's unclear if this is sometime in the future after Gwen Stacy fell, or it's during the battle going on in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. They also went to the wrestling match from Tobey Maguire's first Spider-Man movie, and also the train scene from Spider-Man 2, where Peter has Doctor Strange pinned to the front of the train just like Tobey Maguire. Peter and Doctor Strange also would have gone to the building where Tobey Maguire fought Venom with the metal pipes, and they also had a creative idea of Doctor Strange and Peter having a sword fight. There. These were the No Way Home ideas that ended up being scrapped. Let me know which design or concepts you liked that should have been in the movie.